Dan Henninger wrote a column in the Wall Street Journal today, one of his best columns. I always laugh at Dan Henninger because he is the avatar of the establishment. You know, there is nothing radical about him. There's nothing like, you know, he's mainstream. He looks like the establishment came to life. He looks like if like like in Pinocchio, you said, I'm going to turn the establishment into a real boy, it would be Dan Henninger, okay? So his columns are usually pretty down the middle, not, you know, very radical or anything like this. But he wrote today, he said that he's talking about what I've been talking about all week. The fact that Trump gave a speech in defense of Western civilization and the left said, oh, Western civilization, that's no good, that's racist. Western civilization, that's a code word for white nationalism, for white supremacy. Here's what Henninger says in part. I'm going to read a substantial piece of this because it really is good. He says the Trump base knew that the 2016 presidential election, the contest between Mr. Obama's successor and whoever would run against her, wasn't just another election. It was a crucial event deciding whether America would go on in the Western tradition as it had developed in the U.S. or continue its steady drift away from those ideals as it had in the 8 years under Obama. I completely agree with this. I do agree with this. I do believe that the election of Hillary Clinton would have meant the end of the American experiment, all right? So Henninger goes on. If there is one controlling Western idea developed across centuries in Europe, including by resort to war, it is that the individual person deserves formalized protection from the weight of arbitrary political authority, whether kings, clergy, or dictators. The founders were obsessed with this idea. They designed a government explicitly to protect smaller units, individuals, local governments from being overwhelmed by too powerful political authority. The American left has never been altogether comfortable with the U.S.'s decentralized, difficult political system. Once it identifies a universal political good, it is impatient to put it in place. One of the first American ideas resisted by the left was federalism. The states, they believe, can't be trusted to do the right thing. Now, here's the important part. He's talking about the founding of this country and what the founders were obsessed with. And he talks about Thomas Jefferson's, there's a word for it, but it was his list of charges, his indictment of King George and all the bad things that King George had done. And I won't run through them all right now, but just keep those in mind. Henninger says in the 50s and 60s, the attack on federalism had to do with remedies for racial discrimination. With Mr. Obama, the Federalist disdain accelerated his and here is the list of his indictment, of Henninger's indictment of Barack Obama and his administration. His Environmental Protection Agency imposed regulations on behalf of universalist climate claims. The Eric Holder Justice Department filed lawsuits alleging racial disparities against police departments, towns, and local school systems. The Obama Labor Department did the same to coerce private employers. The Secretary of the Labor Department, Tom Perez, now leads the Democrat National Committee. No more settled part of the West tradition exists than due process of law and the presumption of innocence, which are embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Believing that this Western tradition impeded sexual abuse allegations at colleges, the Obama Education Department issued guidance that reversed due process and legitimized the presumption of guilt. They basically told colleges that they were going to lose money if they didn't presume that young men were guilty anytime they were accused of rape. That they basically took due process away from any boy in a college who got accused of any kind of sexual malfeasance. And you know, with the rampant, crazed feminism on campus, that happens a lot. Eventually, Donald Trump's base somehow intuited that a permanent reformulation of the political traditions of the West was happening here. One way to understand American politics today is to think of our divisions as resonant of the decade before the Revolutionary War, when rebellion's trigger was King George and his parliament in London. In our time, the struggle is about an aggressive elevation of central authority over the smaller units of American life. The progressive Democrats are the new King George, ruling 50 post-colonial states from distant Washington. Donald Trump's base objects. I don't think that's overstating it. I do not think that's overstating it. I think the traditions of the West, this tradition of individual freedom, whether you think the main unit of power should be the individual or the family, which is a big argument that people on the right have, that tradition was eroding completely, and they do not believe in it. The left does not believe in it. You think it's exaggerating to say this stuff, but you only have to look at what they say themselves. The fact that Donald Trump defended Western civilization and they said no. I mean, I keep bringing this up because it's the context of all these crazy summer stories about Donald Trump Jr. or whatever having a meeting where nothing happened. That's the context. The context is the other side doesn't like Western civilization.